Dorothy
Can you
Crane
use
thought the
those?
chain sound on Thursday evening was just farm equipment. She was wrong. Saturday morning, 9:19 a.m. Doy Crane had been chained to a tree in the West Virginia woods for 71 hours. Her core temperature was dropping. 8 hours left, maybe less, before hypothermia would kill her. An 11-year-old boy stood at his father's fence line with a pair of bolt cutters over his shoulder. 4 adults had told him to go home. 4 different ways of saying, "You're imagining things." Fletcher Boggs crossed the fence line anyway, because he'd heard that chain sound on Thursday. And he'd been in those woods every weekend for 5 years. And he knew, the way children know things adults have forgotten how to hear, that the sound didn't belong. What happened in the next 8 hours would expose a 9-year criminal network, bring 1,247 Hells Angels to a small West Virginia town, and prove that the smallest voice in the room is sometimes the only one telling the truth. This is Fletcher and Dottie's story. And the ending will break every assumption you have about who saves who. Subscribe, comment your city. Here's what Dottie said when she saw the bolt cutters. "Can you use those?" 6 words. That's what Doy Crane said to the boy who appeared through the tree line at 9:19 on a Saturday morning in October, thin and slight in an oversized green jacket, bolt cutters visible over his right shoulder. Not "help me," not "please." A capability assessment. Because Doy Crane had been managing her own survival for 71 hours in a hollow that smelled like wet leaves and cold metal, and when rescue finally arrived in the form of a child she'd never met, her first sentence was practical, direct, and completely her. Fletcher Boggs looked at the chains, looked at the bolt cutters, looked at the woman's wrists. Raw, red, the skin abraded where metal had tested flesh for 3 days and 3 nights. He didn't answer. He stepped forward, positioned the cutter jaws on the chain link at her left wrist, and cut. It took 4 attempts. The chain was heavier gauge than the one he'd tested in his father's tool barn 30 minutes earlier. He adjusted his grip. 3rd attempt, partial separation. 4th attempt, the link parted with a sound like a nail pulled from old wood. He moved to the 2nd wrist without being asked. When both chains were cut, and Dottie brought her arms forward for the first time since Wednesday morning. Slowly, carefully, the movement of someone whose body has learned not to make sudden demands. Fletcher spoke. "My dad's place is 1/2 mile. I know the way." He offered his right hand. Not dramatically, practically. She needed help standing. He provided it. "Let me tell you how we got here." Wednesday, 6:47 a.m. Doy Crane was riding alone on Route 3 toward Beckley, her weekly ritual, the 1 hour that belonged entirely to her, no chapter business, no emergency department shifts, just her and the road, and the specific clarity that comes from controlling a machine that demands your full attention. A gray Ford F350 ran her off 4 miles past the Garrison Hollow turnoff. 2 men. She fought. The split lip she'd carry for the next 9 days came from that fight, the bruise along her left cheekbone. She made one of them bleed first. She remembers that part clearly. She is not sorry about it. They chained her to the White Oak at 7:12 a.m., deep in a hollow that Conrad Miles had walked himself in 2019, mapping acoustic isolation with the precision of a man who understood that geography could be a weapon. The chains went on her wrists, her riding jacket, Black leather, Hells Angels West Virginia chapter patch on the back, left sleeve torn from the road contact, stayed on because they didn't take it, and she put it back on the second they left. She understood immediately that the jacket was the variable she could control. For 71 hours, Doy Crane ran the strategy available to her. She rationed movement. She positioned herself to maximize solar exposure during daylight, minimize wind exposure at night. She extended her arm to its full length to reach the creek runoff 30 feet north, just enough to wet her fingers, bring water to her mouth, slow the dehydration that was stealing approximately 8 to 9% of her body fluid over 3 days. She read the birthday card. It was tucked inside her jacket against her chest. A card from her husband, Cole, that he'd left on her bike seat the previous Sunday, their 19th anniversary. The men who chained her hadn't found it. She'd been reading it in her mind approximately every hour since Wednesday afternoon. Cole's handwriting, her name on the outside, every word memorized. She screamed Wednesday morning for 40 minutes until her voice gave out, and she concluded that the location had been chosen for exactly this, acoustic isolation that turned human sound into nothing. She did not scream again. She thought about Cole every hour. She knew he was looking. She knew the chapter was looking. She had been staying alive specifically to be findable. And at 9:17 a.m. on Saturday, she heard footsteps. Fletcher Boggs had heard the chain sound on Thursday evening. A single metallic clink from somewhere east of his father's fence line. Faint, but distinct. The kind of sound that doesn't belong in second-growth forest where the normal audio is wind and water and woodpeckers. He'd gone back Friday morning. Heard it again. Closer this time. He'd found tire tracks on the Garrison Hollow access road that didn't match any vehicle he recognized. He'd found a piece of black leather snagged on fence wire near the eastern boundary. He told his father Thursday night over dinner. Dale Boggs, 44, worked night shift at the Beckley coal preparation plant. He was eating before his shift, exhausted in the specific way that night workers are exhausted even after sleep. He said, "Probably hunters. Don't go past the fence line." He did not look up from his plate. Fletcher put the piece of leather in his jacket pocket. It would become Exhibit 1B. Friday afternoon, Fletcher rode his bike to the Crossroads BP and used the payphone. His school tablet had no cellular. He'd been thinking about this problem since Thursday. He called the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office, asked for someone who handled woods situations, got Deputy Earl Maynard. Fletcher described the tire tracks, the leather piece, a smell he couldn't name that he'd noticed near the eastern fence, metallic and cold, not animal, a sound like chains that he'd heard Thursday evening and again Friday morning. Deputy Maynard listened for approximately 90 seconds, then said, "Son, you're describing a dirt road and a piece of trash. If you find a body, call back." He was not unkind. He was a deputy with 4 active calls, 2 unresolved domestic reports, a county with 480 square miles, and 6 sworn officers. He made a resource calculation and hung up before Fletcher could describe the chain sound in more detail. Doy Crane spent Friday night on the ground because of that calculation. Saturday morning, 8:47 a.m. Fletcher rode past the Garrison Hollow Baptist Church on his way back to the woods. 4 women from the church auxiliary were outside, setting up for a bake sale. He stopped his bike. He told them, 2 of whom he recognized from Sunday services, that he thought someone was hurt in the woods past the eastern fence line. He needed an adult to come with him, or to call the sheriff. The lead woman, mid-50s, the auxiliary president who had organized the church food pantry for 7 years, looked at Fletcher, looked at the woods, put her hand on his shoulder to steer him back toward his bike. "Honey, those woods back up to Garrison Hollow. You don't know what goes on back there. Your daddy told you to stay out of those woods, and you ought to listen to him." Fletcher stood still. "I think someone is chained to a tree." She looked at him for 3 full seconds. "You have quite an imagination. Go on home." 4 adults. 3 days. 4 different ways of saying, what you're seeing is not worth investigating. And an 11-year-old boy stood at his father's fence line at 9:08 a.m. on Saturday morning and decided that all 4 of them were wrong. Not because he was reckless, because he had been in those woods every weekend for 5 years since his mother left, since his father gave him the woods by not taking them away, since he learned their acoustic properties and their topography and the specific difference between a sound that belongs and a sound that doesn't. The chain clink on Thursday evening was a sound that did not belong. Fletcher went to the tool barn, found his father's bolt cutters, 24-inch compound action model, orange handles, heavier than they looked. He tested them once on an old chain. They worked. He put them over his shoulder and crossed the fence line at 9:08 a.m. He followed the creak sound for 11 minutes. Then the chain sound. A single deliberate test clink that he located from 200 feet away and stopped walking to triangulate. At 9:19 a.m., Fletcher Boggs came through the last stand of scrub oak and saw the jacket first. The patch on the back. The chains. Then the woman's face turning toward the sound of his footsteps. She took him in for 3 full seconds. His size. His age. The bolt cutters. He took her in. The chains, the split lip, the alertness in her eyes that should not have been there after 71 hours, but was the specific sharpness of a person who has decided that consciousness is non-negotiable. "Can you use those?" He could. He did. The walk out took 31 minutes. Fletcher positioned himself on Dottie's left side, the weaker side, where the jacket sleeve was torn, and matched his pace to hers. She leaned on him twice. He did not comment on it. At the fence line, Dottie stopped to rest against the post. Fletcher reached into his jacket pocket and produced the piece of black leather. Held it out. "I found this Thursday, on the fence wire. I told my dad. He said hunters. I called the deputy. He said it was trash. The church lady said I had an imagination." Dottie looked at the leather. It was from her left riding glove. She knew it immediately. She looked at the boy. "You kept coming back." "I heard the chain on Thursday. I just kept coming back until I found what made it." They reached the Boggs property at 9:50 a.m. Dale Boggs was in the kitchen, coffee in hand, staring at nothing in the specific way that night shift workers stare when their sleep schedule has been destroyed. He looked up when the door opened, saw his son, saw the woman in the leather jacket with the Hells Angels patch, saw the raw wounds on her wrists, saw the bolt cutters in Fletcher's other hand. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "Dad, call 911. Her name is Doy Crane. Her husband is Cole Crane. He rides with the Hells Angels. She's been chained in the woods since Wednesday." Dale set the cup down, picked up the phone. While he talked to dispatch, Dottie sat at the kitchen table across from Fletcher. "The men who chained me," she said, voice rough, lower than its natural register, "called each other by name. One was Harlan. The other one he called Miles twice on the phone before they left. Conrad Miles. He runs the salvage yard on Route 16. She looked at Fletcher. Those bolt cutters just broke open 9 years of criminal operation. You understand that? You just did that. Fletcher looked at the bolt cutters leaning against the kitchen wall, then at his father, who was on the phone with 911, whose face carried an expression Fletcher had never seen before, something between pride and horror and the specific shame of a parent who understands that his child saw something he failed to see. "I heard the chain on Thursday," Fletcher said again. "I just kept coming back." Dottie reached across the table and put her hand over Fletcher's hand. Both hands, the way you would hold something you might have lost. "You just saved my life. I need you to know that isn't small. That is the least small thing." Then Dale handed her the phone. Cole's number connected, and Dottie's voice did something it had not done in 71 hours. It broke. "If you believe every child deserves to be heard the first time they speak, comment, 'I'm listening,' and subscribe, because what happens in the next 8 hours will show you what 1,247 people can do when one boy refuses to be quiet." Cole Crane heard his wife's voice at 10:04 a.m. and knew 3 things immediately. She was alive. She was hurt. And someone had just made the worst mistake of their life. He was on his bike in 4 minutes. By 10:09 a.m., he'd called his brother. The call lasted 17 seconds. "Stetson, it's Cole. Talk to me. They found Dottie. A kid found her, chained in the woods off Garrison Hollow for 3 days. She's alive. She named Conrad Miles." Silence. 2 seconds. "Every brother within 60 miles. Beckley. Or H. Now." The line went dead. Stetson Gravel Crane was 62 years old and hadn't raised his voice in 9 years. He didn't need to. He made 11 phone calls in the next 43 minutes. Each call less than 90 seconds. By noon, he'd contacted 3 additional chapters. By 3 p.m., the staging count was 847 riders. By 5:30 p.m., it would be 1,247. He did not raise his voice once. He stated facts. Brothers mobilized. Because that's what Brotherhood meant when a woman wearing the patch spent 71 hours in a hollow and a boy with bolt cutters did what 4 adults wouldn't do. Cole Crane arrived at Beckley ARH Emergency Department at 11:23 a.m. Dottie was in Bay 7, 4 in her left arm. Heated blanket. A nurse documenting the wrist wounds with photographs that would become evidence. Cole stopped in the doorway. She turned her head, looked at him. 71 hours collapsed into 3 seconds. He crossed the room, sat in the chair beside the bed, put his hand over hers, carefully, avoiding the IV line. "I looked everywhere. I know. I didn't know where. I know, Cole. I know." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Who found you?" "An 11-year-old boy named Fletcher Boggs. He heard chains on Thursday. Told his father, told a deputy, told some church ladies. They all sent him home. He came back Saturday morning with bolt cutters." Cole looked at his wife's wrists, the raw wounds, the IV, the thermal blanket. "Where is he?" "His father brought him. They're in the waiting room." Cole stood, walked to the waiting room, found a thin boy in an oversized green jacket sitting next to a man who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. Cole crouched in front of the boy until they were eye level. "Fletcher?" The boy nodded. "I'm Cole Crane, Dottie's husband." He extended his hand. Fletcher shook it. She told me what you did, that you kept trying, that everyone told you no, that you went anyway. Fletcher didn't say anything. Cole reached into his vest pocket, pulled out a chapter coin, a challenge coin given to brothers, civilians who'd earned respect, people who'd done something that mattered. He put it in Fletcher's hand. You did what grown men didn't do. You listened when it mattered. You acted when everyone else walked away. He closed Fletcher's fingers around the coin. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call the number on that coin. Someone will answer. Always. Fletcher looked at the coin, looked at Cole. Is she going to be okay? Because of you? Yeah. She's going to be okay. But that wasn't the whole story. Because while Dottie was being stabilized in Bay 7, while Cole was thanking an 11-year-old boy in the waiting room, another brother was making a phone call that would change everything. His name was Ironside. Age 51. Former West Virginia State Police, Organized Crime Unit, 18 years on the job before he retired and patched in with the chapter. He knew the Iron Hollow file better than the unit that currently held it. He called the duty analyst at 10:44 a.m. It's Ironside. You have an open case on Conrad Miles and the Iron Hollow crew. We do. Doy Crane, Cole Crane's wife, Hells Angels West Virginia chapter, just came out of a hollow after being chained there for 71 hours. She named Conrad Miles and Harlan Greer as the men who put her there. You have a Friday night surveillance recording, don't you? Silence. Then, how do you know about the Friday recording? Because I know how your unit works, and I know you've been waiting for a conversation worth acting on. Friday's conversation is that conversation. Doy Crane just gave you the Nexus event to activate your warrant. We're already pulling the warrant package. How long before you execute? 3 to 4 hours. Make it 2. The compound camera footage overwrites every 96 hours. Dottie's bike was brought in Wednesday at 2:47 p.m. You've got approximately 25 hours before that footage disappears. You lose that footage, you lose the cleanest evidence in the case. The analyst was quiet. Then, I'll make the call. Ironside hung up and called Coldwater. Coldwater, 44 years old, digital forensics background, was already pulling up the operational ledger that the state police would find in Conrad Miles's safe 3 hours later. I need you to cross-reference vehicle entries against open stolen vehicle reports. Date ranges from 2019 to present. Coldwater's fingers moved across the keyboard. Give me 90 minutes. You've got 60. Meanwhile, at Stetson Crane's kitchen table, another brother was making notes. His road name was Knotwood. Age 57. Former Raleigh County prosecutor, 14 years in the office before he burned out and left. He knew asset forfeiture law better than most federal attorneys. If the ledger shows a pattern of revenue across multiple years, and if the state police can tie vehicle entries to specific theft reports, this isn't a theft case. This is a criminal enterprise case. Federal RICO charges. Asset forfeiture of everything. The salvage yard, the vehicles, the cash, the property. Stetson looked at him. How much are we talking? The annual operation, based on what Ironside pulled from surveillance, ran approximately $347,200 net last fiscal year. Add the prior victim payout to Alton Briggs in 2019, $178,300. Add the cash in the safe, $61,400. You're looking at forfeiture north of $500,000 plus the property itself. Stetson was quiet. Then, Conrad Miles chained a woman in the woods for 3 days because Cole's been cooperating with state police intelligence. He thought the geography would protect him. He thought Cole would stand down to get Dottie back. He thought wrong. Yeah, he did. By 1:47 p.m. Saturday, Barely 5 hours after Fletcher freed Doty from the chains, West Virginia State Police executed the warrant at Miles Auto Salvage. Conrad Miles was in the front office, eating a sandwich, arguing with someone on the phone about a towing fee. He looked up when 6 officers came through the door. Looked confused, almost annoyed, like a man interrupted during a normal day, because to him, this was normal. The safe was in the bottom drawer of his desk. The ledger was inside. The $61,400 in cash was there. The burner phone with 14 outgoing calls in 9 days, 6 of them to Harlan Greer's number, was there. In the main chop building, Doty's 2019 Harley-Davidson Road King sat in pieces. The VIN had not been altered yet. Harlan Greer had been ordered to finish it Friday night. He hadn't. That unaltered VIN was the cleanest piece of evidence in the case. The compound camera footage had 24 hours and 13 minutes remaining before automatic overwrite. The footage showed Doty's Road King being brought into the compound at 2:47 p.m. Wednesday, 11 hours after she was chained in the hollow. The timeline was airtight. But here's what the official investigation didn't catch yet, because while the state police were executing the warrant, Coldwater was in Stetson's kitchen, staring at his laptop screen, and his face had gone very still. "Stetson, look at this." The operational ledger, photographed by state police, shared with Ironside, forwarded to Coldwater, had entries going back 9 years. Vehicle acquisitions, revenue logs, distribution routes, all coded but legible to anyone with 20 minutes and context. And there, on page 4, was an entry that made Coldwater stop scrolling. Briggs resolution, $178,300, paid. "Who's Briggs?" Stetson asked. "Alton Briggs, hired at Miles Auto Salvage in 2019. Discovered the chop operation within 3 months. Made the mistake of saying so to Conrad Miles directly. Got driven to the Wyoming County line at 2 a.m., handed $178,300 in cash, and told that was his silence money and his departure fee. The alternative was the hollow. He took the money. He's been in Charleston for 4 years, never filed a report, never made a claim. He kept one piece of evidence, a photograph of a VIN plate on a vehicle he recognized from a stolen car report. Took it on his phone 2 days before the Wyoming County drive." Stetson leaned back in his chair. "Call him." "Right now?" "Right now." The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Coldwater identified himself, explained what had happened to Doty, asked if Alton Briggs remembered anything about Conrad Miles that might be useful to a federal investigation. There was silence on the other end. Then, "You're the first person who's called in 4 years. I need to know what you saw." Another long silence. Then Alton Briggs started talking. He talked for 47 minutes. Coldwater recorded every word. At the end, he asked, "Do you still have that photograph? The VIN plate?" "Yeah." "Can you send it to me?" 11 minutes later, the photograph arrived in a text message. The VIN matched a stolen vehicle report from August 2019, a 2018 Chevrolet Silverado taken from a parking lot in Fayette County. The truck had been reported stolen 3 years ago. Conrad Miles had chopped it, sold the parts, and logged the revenue in his ledger under a coded entry that Coldwater now understood completely. At 2:31 p.m., Coldwater called Ironside. The ledger has 7 vehicle entries that match open stolen vehicle reports across 3 counties. Date ranges from 2019 to present. The social media location posts from Harlan Greer place him 3 miles from Doty's intercept site, Wednesday morning at 6:30 a.m. The call log from the burner phone shows 6 calls to Greer in 9 days. And Alton Briggs just sent me photographic evidence of a Vienne from a vehicle Conrad Miles chopped in 2019. Send everything to the state police analyst. Now. Already done. By 3:15 p.m., the scope of the case had changed. This wasn't one woman chained in a hollow. This was a 9-year criminal enterprise with a documented pattern of violence, intimidation, theft, and financial fraud. The Friday night surveillance recording, the one the state police organized crime unit had been waiting for, captured Conrad Miles and Harlan Greer in the salvage compound office at 8:23 p.m., discussing Doty's location, the timeline, and the calculation that Doy Crane would stand down to get his wife back. The recording included one line that would become the centerpiece of the federal case. Until Crane calls off the cooperation, he knows what this is, he'll make the call by Sunday. Conrad Miles had been counting on love. He'd been counting on Cole choosing Doty over the investigation. He'd been counting on fear. What he hadn't counted on was an 11-year-old boy who heard chains on a Thursday evening and refused to stop until he found what made the sound. Saturday, 4:47 p.m. Beckley Veterans Memorial Parking Area. The rumble started low and distant, like thunder building on the horizon. Then it grew into something that shook windows 3 blocks away and set off car alarms in the medical center lot. By the time the first row of motorcycles pulled into the Veterans Memorial parking area, the sound was deafening. 847 engines roaring in unison, chrome gleaming in the late October light, leather vests bearing the same insignia. They parked in disciplined rows, tight, smooth, the practiced choreography of men who'd ridden together for years and knew exactly how much space each bike needed, how to form up without blocking exits, how to stage a presence without creating chaos. Engines died almost in unison. The sudden silence after all that noise felt heavy and expectant. 847 bikers stood there, not moving, not shouting, simply present. By 5:30 p.m., the count would reach 1,247. Now you might be thinking, 1,247 Hell's Angels descending on a small West Virginia town. And the first move is what? Smashing windows? Storming the salvage yard? Hunting down Conrad Miles with fists ready? That's not the story you expected, is it? Because here's what actually happened. At 4:52 p.m., Stetson Crane stood at the front of the formation and made one phone call. To the West Virginia State Police Organized Crime Unit duty officer. This is Stetson Crane, Hell's Angels West Virginia chapter. We have 847 riders currently staged at the Beckley Veterans Memorial. We expect over 1,200 by nightfall. We are here in support of Doy Crane and the investigation into Conrad Miles and the Iron Hollow crew. We are not here to interfere with law enforcement. We are here to ensure that the community understands the scope of what happened and that it does not happen again. If you need witness cooperation, evidence, or testimony, every man here will provide it. We will maintain discipline, we will maintain peace, and we will be visible until this case is resolved. The duty officer was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, understood. We'll coordinate. The call ended. That was it. No threats, no demands, just a statement of presence and a promise of cooperation. Because 1,247 motorcycles don't need to do anything but exist in one place at one time to communicate that a community is watching, that silence has ended, that what happened in that hollow matters to more people than Conrad Miles calculated. But while the brothers staged at the memorial, other work was happening. Because this wasn't a show of force. This was a coordinated operation with specific objectives and brothers assigned to each one based on skill, background, bones, and what the case needed. At 3:47 p.m., exactly 1 hour before the main formation arrived, 4 brothers had knocked on doors along Garrison Hollow Road. Witness 1. Doy Boggs, 44, Fletcher's father. Ironside sat across from Dale at the same kitchen table where Dottie had made her calls 6 hours earlier. A recording device sat between them. Small, unobtrusive, but visible. Everything recorded. Everything documented. Mr. Boggs, I need you to walk me through Thursday morning, when Fletcher first told you about the tire tracks. Dale's hands shook slightly as he spoke. Not from fear. From the specific guilt of a parent who understands that his child saw something he failed to see. He came in Thursday night, said he'd found tire tracks on the Garrison Hollow access road that didn't match any vehicle he knew. Said he'd found a piece of black leather on the fence wire. I was eating before my night shift. I was tired. I said, his voice broke slightly. I said probably hunters. Told him not to go past the fence line. I didn't look up from my plate. Did he mention the sound? Yeah. He said he'd heard something metallic, like chains. I told him it was probably farm equipment or somebody fixing a fence. And Friday? Friday he asked me again. Asked if I'd walk out there with him. I said I needed to sleep before my shift. Told him to leave it alone. Dale looked at his hands. My son spent 3 days telling me someone was in trouble, and I didn't listen because I was tired, and I didn't want to deal with it. He went out there Saturday morning with my bolt cutters because I wouldn't go with him. Ironside leaned forward slightly. Mr. Boggs, do you understand that your son's persistence, the fact that he kept observing, kept reporting, kept going back, is the reason Doy Crane is alive? I understand that he did what I should have done. Ironside stopped the recording. What you just gave me is the first civilian corroboration of the timeline. You documented that Fletcher reported anomalies on Thursday and Friday, 2 days before he found her. That establishes pattern recognition. That establishes credibility. And it establishes that the system failed before your son succeeded. Dale nodded slowly. Your son saved a woman's life. You're going to spend a long time with Thursday and Friday. I get that. But what he did Saturday, he learned that from somewhere. He learned to trust what he knows, to act when adults won't. That doesn't come from nowhere. Witness 2. Deputy Earl Maynard, 58, Raleigh County Sheriff's Office. Knotwood found Maynard at the sheriff's office at 4:03 p.m. Maynard was the first law enforcement officer on scene at the Boggs property Saturday morning. He'd made the call to state police at 10:11 a.m. when Dottie named Miles. Deputy, I need your statement about the Friday phone call, when Fletcher Boggs called about the tire tracks and the leather piece. Maynard's face was lined in a way that had nothing to do with age. I told him it sounded like a dirt road and a piece of trash. Told him if he found a body, call back. Why? Because I had 4 active calls, 2 unresolved domestic reports, a county with 480 square miles and 6 sworn officers, a boy calling about tire tracks and a smell. I made a resource calculation. I triaged it as low-priority juvenile noise. He mentioned chains. He mentioned a sound he thought might be chains. I've been a deputy for 19 years. I've had 17 calls about mysterious sounds in the woods. 16 of them were nothing. I played the odds. Knotwood was quiet. Then, Doy Crane spent Friday night in that hollow because of those odds. Maynard's jaw tightened. I know. Are you willing to testify about the resource constraints? The call volume? The officer-to-case ratio that made that calculation necessary? Yes. Because here's what we're building, Deputy. Not a case against you. A case against the structural conditions that make Friday's decision inevitable. 6 officers for 480 square miles isn't sustainable. Low officer-to-case ratios create systematic blind spots. Familiarity bias, hearing "boy in the woods" and making a rapid triage decision, is a feature of exhaustion, not malice. You cooperated fully when the information became complete. You made the call to state police. You did your job. But the system you're working inside is failing, and it's failing predictably. Maynard looked at the table. What do you need from me? A written statement documenting the call volume, the resource constraints, and the decision-making process. Not an apology. An explanation. So that the next time a boy calls about chains in the woods, there's a mandatory callback protocol for reports involving missing persons cases. Maynard nodded. I'll write it tonight. Witness 3. Margaret Hollins, 56, Garrison Hollow Baptist Church Auxiliary President. Rimshot, 48 years old, former EMT, current chapter medical authority, found Margaret at the church at 4:31 p.m. She was alone, cleaning up from the bake sale, moving slowly, her hands occupied with tablecloths and leftover pastries. He stood in the doorway until she looked up. Mrs. Hollins? Yes? My name is Rimshot. I ride with the Hells Angels West Virginia chapter. I need to talk to you about Saturday morning, when Fletcher Boggs asked for help. Her hands stopped moving. The tablecloth she'd been folding went still. He told you he thought someone was chained in the woods. Asked you to come with him or call the sheriff. You told him he had quite an imagination and sent him home. Margaret's face flushed. I thought he was imagining it. You thought an 11-year-old boy describing tire tracks, leather on a fence, a metallic smell, and a chain sound over 3 days was imagining things. She looked at her hands. The tablecloth. Anywhere but at him. Mrs. Hollins, you organize the food pantry for this church. You believe in showing up for people who need help. You do the work. I've seen the records. You've been doing it for 7 years. Yes. So I need to understand. You looked at a boy who was asking for help. Not for himself, for someone else, and you concluded that his imagination was more likely than the possibility that someone was actually in trouble. Why? Silence. Because walking into those woods scared you. Because Garrison Hollow backs up to places you don't think about. Because saying yes would have required you to do something uncomfortable, and it was easier to tell yourself he was making it up. Margaret's voice came out very small. I didn't know. No. You didn't know because you chose not to find out. You had a chance to believe a child who had been observing, documenting, reporting for 3 days. You had a chance to make one phone call. You sent him home instead. Her hands were shaking now. The tablecloth slipped to the floor. Doy Crane spent 32 more minutes alone in that hollow while Fletcher made his own decision about what to do next. She was 8 hours and 9 minutes from hypothermia death when he found her. If he'd listened to you, she'd be dead. Margaret's voice broke. I didn't want to be the one who made it worse. You weren't worried about making it worse. You were worried about being wrong, about looking foolish, about walking into the woods and finding nothing and having people talk about how Margaret Hollins overreacted to a child's story. She couldn't meet his eyes. Doy Crane is alive because an 11-year-old boy decided that knowing something was enough to act on. You're going to live with Saturday morning for the rest of your life. I can't change that. But what I need from you right now is a written statement documenting exactly what Fletcher said, exactly what you said, and why you made the choice you made. Not an apology. The truth. Margaret nodded slowly. Her face was wet. Because the most dangerous assumption we make about children is that their observations require adult confirmation to be valid. Fletcher Boggs had been confirming his observations for 2 days. He didn't need your permission, but he asked for it anyway, and you said no. At 5:14 p.m., Coldwater called Stetson from his laptop in the church parking lot. I've cross-referenced the operational ledger against open stolen vehicle reports. 7 matches. Date ranges from August 2019 to March of this year. The social media location posts from Harlan Greer and 2 other crew members place them in proximity to 4 of the 7 theft locations within 48 hours of the reported thefts. Send it to Ironside. Already done. But Stetson, there's something else in the ledger. Page 11. An entry from 2019 that doesn't match the vehicle theft pattern. What is it? Vickers resolution, $312,000. Paid. Stetson was very quiet. Who's Vickers? I don't know yet, but that number is too large for a vehicle theft payout. It's in the same format as the Briggs entry, resolution fee paid in cash, and it's dated October 2019, 1 month after Alton Briggs left. Find out who Vickers is. At 5:47 p.m., Coldwater had an answer. Marion Vickers, Conrad Miles's late wife. Died October 14th, 2019. Death certificate lists cause of death as complications from pneumonia. She'd been in declining health for 6 months. Treated at Beckley ARH for respiratory issues 3 times in the 4 months before her death. Life insurance? Whole life policy. $312,000 payout, taken out 18 months before her death. Beneficiary, Conrad Miles. Stetson closed his eyes. How did she die? At home, unattended. Miles called 911 at 3:17 a.m. Paramedics arrived, pronounced her dead at the scene. No autopsy, no questions. Find the medical records. Find the paramedic report. Find out who her doctor was. Already pulling them. By 6:23 p.m., the pattern was clear. Marion Vickers had been hospitalized 3 times in 4 months for respiratory distress. Each time, she'd been stabilized, sent home with medication, told to follow up with her primary care physician. She never followed up. The paramedic report from the night she died noted, extensive medication bottles on bedside table. Patient appears to have been non-compliant with prescribed regimen. The death certificate was signed by a physician who'd never treated Marion Vickers personally, but who reviewed the medical records and concluded that pneumonia complications were consistent with her documented health decline. No one questioned it. Conrad Miles collected $312,000 37 days later, and 3 weeks after that, he upgraded the fence at Miles Auto Salvage to 8 feet with razor wire, installed a 6-camera security system, and hired Harlan Greer as his first full-time crew member. Knotwood reviewed the documents at 7:004 p.m. and made one phone call. To a forensic pathologist he'd worked with during his prosecutor years. A woman who specialized in reviewing suspicious deaths that had been ruled natural. He described Marion Vickers's medical timeline, the hospitalizations, the medication non-compliance, the sudden death at home, the lack of autopsy. She listened without interrupting. Then, send me everything. Medical records, paramedic report, death certificate, the insurance policy. I'll review it tonight. What are you looking for? A pattern. Pneumonia doesn't kill a 52-year-old woman in 4 months, unless something else is suppressing her immune system or interfering with treatment. Medication non-compliance in someone who'd been hospitalized 3 times suggests either cognitive decline or someone controlling access to medication. If she was living with Conrad Miles and he was managing her medication schedule, he could have simply stopped giving it to her, or given her less than prescribed, or skipped doses strategically. It wouldn't show up in an autopsy unless someone was looking for it, and without an autopsy, it's the perfect crime. It's a crime that looks like nature. At 7:52 p.m., the forensic pathologist called back. The medical records show Marion Vickers was prescribed 3 medications: a corticosteroid for respiratory inflammation, an antibiotic for secondary infection, and a bronchodilator. The hospitalizations occurred when she stopped taking them or took them irregularly. Each time, the hospital staff documented patient education about medication compliance. Each time, Marion told them she understood and would follow the schedule. And the medication bottles on her bedside table the night she died, according to the paramedic report, were all full or nearly full. She hadn't been taking them for weeks. Why? Because someone convinced her she didn't need them, or told her they were making her worse, or simply hid them and gave her placebos. I've seen this pattern 17 times in cases involving financial motive and gradual decline. It's called passive medical neglect homicide. You don't poison someone. You just stop treating them. Their own body does the work. Knotwood was quiet. Can you testify to this? I can testify to the pattern. I can testify that the medical records are inconsistent with voluntary non-compliance, given her documented understanding and prior adherence during hospitalization. I can testify that the insurance policy timeline, 18 months before death, is statistically significant. But without exhumation and autopsy, I can't prove cause of death was homicide. What if we exhume? After 7 years? Depending on burial conditions, you might find trace evidence of medication levels that contradict the prescribed dosage. You might find nothing, but the attempt matters. It tells a jury you're serious. I'll make the call. At 8:19 p.m., Stetson Crane stood at the front of 1,247 motorcycles and addressed the brothers. The sun had set. The veterans' memorial lights cast long shadows across the parking area. Every engine was silent. Every man was listening. Conrad Miles chained Doy Crane in a hollow for 3 days because he thought fear was a weapon he could use. He thought Cole would trade his state police cooperation for his wife's freedom. He thought an 11-year-old boy's reports could be dismissed. He thought the geography would protect him. And he thought Marion Vickers' death in 2019 would look like nature. He paused. Let that sit. He was wrong about all of it. No one spoke. Tomorrow morning, the Raleigh County Prosecutor's Office will petition for exhumation of Marion Vickers' remains. The forensic pathologist will conduct an autopsy looking for evidence of passive medical neglect. If the evidence supports homicide, Conrad Miles will face murder charges in addition to the federal RICO charges already being filed for the Iron Hollow operation. Another pause. We are not here for revenge. We are here because what happened to Dottie, what happened to Marion Vickers, what happened to Alton Briggs and every person who was intimidated, threatened, or silenced by this man, that ends today. Not with violence, with visibility, with every brother here being a witness that this community will not look away again. The silence held. Every man who rode here today did so because a boy with bolt cutters trusted what he knew and acted when 4 adults told him he was wrong. Fletcher Boggs is 11 years old. He doesn't have a patch. He doesn't have a bike. What he has is the courage to go back when everyone told him to go home. That's the standard. That's what we're here to match. Stetson looked across the formation. 1,247 faces looking back. All in favor? For 3 seconds, nothing. Just the distant sound of traffic and wind through the memorial trees. Then, slowly, every single hand went up. Not one dissent. Not one hesitation. 1,247 men voting unanimously to stand witness. The thing about criminal empires is they don't collapse all at once. They unravel. Thread by thread, document by document, name by name. And the Iron Hollow crew started unraveling the moment Coldwater opened Conrad Miles's operational ledger on his laptop screen and found the entry that shouldn't have been there. Sunday, 1:23 a.m. Stetson Crane's kitchen. Coldwater had been awake for 19 hours. His eyes burned. His coffee had gone cold twice, but he couldn't stop scrolling, because page 14 of the ledger had something that made him sit up straight and call Ironside immediately. I found a shell company. Ironside, who'd been reviewing Marion Vickers's medical records at his own kitchen table 16 miles away, put the phone on speaker. Talk. Entry dated March 2021. Hollow Creek Holdings, LLC, established. No revenue attached. No vehicle entries. Just a name and a date. I ran it through the state business registry. Hollow Creek Holdings is registered to an address in Fayette County. The registered agent is someone named Douglas Parnell. You know that name? No. Who is he? According to LinkedIn, a financial advisor, small firm in Oak Hill, specializes in estate planning and asset protection for small business owners. Call him. It's 1:30 a.m. Call him anyway. Douglas Parnell answered on the 4th ring. His voice was thick with sleep and confusion. Hello? Mr. Parnell, my name is Coldwater. I'm calling on behalf of a federal investigation into Conrad Miles and the Iron Hollow Criminal Organization. Your name appears as the registered agent for Hollow Creek Holdings, LLC. I need to know what that company is and what your relationship to Conrad Miles is. Silence. Then, who is this? I'm a digital forensics analyst working in cooperation with the West Virginia State Police Organized Crime Unit. Hollow Creek. Holdings appears in Conrad Miles's operational ledger. If you established that company for him, you are either a witness or an accessory. Which one depends on what you tell me in the next 2 minutes. Another long silence. Then Douglas Parnell started talking. Hollow Creek Holdings, LLC, was a shell company designed to launder stolen vehicle revenue. Conrad Miles came to Parnell in March 2021 with a proposal: establish a holding company that could accept cash deposits from independent contractors working in salvage and scrap metal. The company would issue payment to those contractors as if they were legitimate vendors, creating a paper trail that looked clean. Parnell structured it, filed the paperwork, set up the bank account. Did you know the revenue was from stolen vehicles? I suspected, but I didn't. You didn't ask. He told me it was cash basis salvage work, guys selling scrap metal, old parts. I thought, you thought it was plausible enough that you could tell yourself you didn't know. How much did he pay you to set it up? Silence. How much, Mr. Parnell? $16,000. And how much revenue has moved through Hollow Creek Holdings since March 2021? I don't have access to the account anymore. He changed the access credentials in 2022. I haven't seen the statements in 2 years. But you're still the registered agent? Yes. Mr. Parnell, I'm going to connect you with the FBI agent handling this case. You're going to provide every document you have related to Hollow Creek Holdings, every email, every contract, every transaction record from when you had access. And you're going to testify. If you cooperate fully, you might avoid federal charges. If you don't, you're going to prison as an accessory to a RICO operation. Do you understand? Yes. The call ended. At 2:47 a.m., Coldwater called Ironside back. Hollow Creek Holdings has moved approximately $1.3 million through its accounts since March 2021. Parnell is sending me the initial transaction records. The FBI agent is going to subpoena the bank for the full account history. $1.3 million. In 3 years. The annual operation we calculated at $347,200 was just the vehicle chop revenue that Miles kept off the books. Hollow Creek was the laundering mechanism for the distribution side, controlled substance transport using towing vehicles as cover. Ironside was quiet. Then, how many people are in this network? Based on the ledger entries and the Hollow Creek transactions, minimum 9 crew members below Miles, probably more. Harlan Greer is Tier 2, operational execution, but there's a tier below him handling chop, transport, and distribution logistics. We need names. The FBI is pulling phone records from the burner we recovered, cross-referencing with Hollow Creek transaction recipients. We'll have a list by morning. At 6:14 a.m. Sunday, the FBI made contact. Special Agent Carla Reeves walked into Stetson Crane's kitchen without knocking. Ironside was on his 3rd cup of coffee. Coldwater had fallen asleep on the couch 2 hours earlier and was now awake again, staring at his laptop. She was plain-clothed, practical. Exhaustion had settled into her face in a way that coffee no longer touched. I'm told you have something relevant to an open federal investigation. Ironside looked up, nodded once, didn't extend his hand. Depends on what you're investigating. Conrad Miles, Iron Hollow crew, RICO charges, asset forfeiture, and now, potentially, homicide related to Marion Vickers. Ironside looked at Coldwater. A decision was made without words. How long has your office known about Conrad Miles? Agent Reeves didn't flinch. We've had an open case for 4 years. We've been building it legally, carefully, by the book. We had the financial trail. We didn't have the Nexus event to prove criminal enterprise until Saturday. You had 4 years, we got Doy Crane out in 8 hours. The truth sat between them, heavy, undeniable. Ironside stood, walked to the table, laid out 3 items. The operational ledger, photographed, annotated. The Alton Briggs 5IN photograph. The Hollow Creek Holdings transaction records Douglas Parnell had sent at 3:42 a.m. Agent Reeves reviewed each item. Her expression shifted. She stopped writing, set her pen down, leaned forward slightly. This fills gaps we haven't been able to close for 4 years. We know. If this is all authenticated, it changes the scope of the charges significantly. We're looking at federal RICO, asset forfeiture of the salvage yard, and all properties, conspiracy, fraud, and if the Marion Vickers autopsy supports homicide, we add murder. Ironside leaned back. We have one condition. I'm listening. Doy Crane gets a victim advocate assigned before the first interview. Nobody talks to her without her asking first. And the second arrest, Harlan Greer and the Tier 2 crew, happens today. Not after another week of paperwork. Agent Reeves looked at the documents, looked at Ironside. We'll be in touch. She turned to leave. Agent Reeves. She stopped. You do right by her. A beat. That's the job. After she left, Ironside poured another cup of coffee and looked at Coldwater. The system wasn't broken. That was the thing people got wrong. A broken system could be fixed. This one worked exactly as designed, built to move slowly, to require proof beyond doubt, to protect the rights of the accused even at the cost of the victim's time. Nobody built it to be cruel. It just turned out that way sometimes, when the person inside it needed saving faster than the paperwork could catch up. The brothers hadn't replaced the system. They'd bought the time the system needed to work. Coldwater nodded slowly. Now let's finish this. At 11:47 a.m. Sunday, the FBI arrested Harlan Greer at his home in Wyoming County. He was mowing his lawn, wearing a faded Steelers t-shirt, had grease on his hands from fixing the mower blade that morning. He looked up when 4 agents came across the grass, looked confused. Then understanding hit. He asked if someone could call his neighbor about his mail. At 1:33 p.m., the full scope was clear. 9 Tier 3 crew members identified through phone records and Hollow Creek transaction histories. 7 stolen vehicles matched to the operational ledger. $1.3 million laundered through Hollow Creek Holdings. Marion Vickers's exhumation ordered for Tuesday morning. Doy Crane's case, assault, kidnapping, criminal restraint, forming the nexus for federal RICO charges. Alton Briggs's testimony and photographic evidence establishing the 9-year pattern. Fletcher Boggs's witness statement documenting the 3-day observation period that every adult dismissed. The charges: federal RICO conspiracy, interstate transportation of stolen vehicles, money laundering through Hollow Creek Holdings, kidnapping, Doy Crane, witness intimidation, Alton Briggs, others, pending, first-degree murder, Marion Vickers, pending autopsy results, asset forfeiture, Miles Auto, salvage property, and all structures, 7 vehicles in various states of disassembly, $61,400 cash from the safe, all Hollow Creek Holdings accounts, $1.3 million. Conrad Miles's personal property, 2023 F35, O residential property. Total forfeiture, $2,187,600. 9 years of operation, 47 minutes to testify, 8 hours from rescue to warrant execution. And it started with an 11-year-old boy who heard a sound that didn't belong. Monday morning, 9:47. A.M. Rimshot sat in the waiting room at Beckley A.R.H. while Dottie was being examined for the 3rd time in 36 hours. He'd brought a thermal blanket, the kind that actually worked, not the paper-thin hospital version, and a specific brand of ginger tea that helped with nausea without requiring appetite. He hadn't asked if she needed these things. He'd just brought them. When the examination finished and Dottie emerged from the bay, Rimshot stood, handed her the blanket, set the tea on the side table within reach. How are the wrists? Healing, slowly. She looked at the tea. You didn't have to. I know. The doctor appeared in the doorway. Dr. Sarah Collins, emergency department attending, holding a clipboard with numbers that mattered. Mrs. Crane, your core temperature is stable at 98.1. Dehydration has resolved with IV fluids. The wrist wounds are showing good healing response. No spreading infection, No signs of cellulitis. We're discharging you today with oral antibiotics, wound care instructions, and a follow-up in 5 days. She looked at Rimshot, then back at Dottie. The hypothermia assessment we ran Saturday, based on your initial presentation and the weather data, you had approximately 8 hours and 41 minutes before moderate hypothermia would have become severe. In the field, without shelter, that timeline is not survivable. You were found at 9:19 a.m. The window closed at approximately 6 p.m. Saturday. Dottie was quiet. Then, 8 hours. 8 hours and 41 minutes. Dr. Collins looked at Rimshot. Thank you for getting her here when you did. After she left, Dottie sat very still, holding the tea without drinking it. 8 hours. If Fletcher had listened to those church ladies, if he'd gone home, if he'd decided one more time that 4 adults knew better than he did. But he didn't. No, he didn't. At 2:17 p.m., Monday, Knotwood sat across from Dottie and Cole at their kitchen table. The same table where Cole had proposed 19 years ago, where they'd argued about chapter business and paid bills and planned anniversary trips and built the ordinary architecture of a shared life. The restraining order against Conrad Miles and Harlan Greer is active as of this morning. 500-foot minimum distance. No contact, no third-party contact. Violation is immediate arrest. He slid the paperwork across. Dottie read it. Cole's hand found hers. The federal charges: RICO, kidnapping, witness intimidation, carry a combined minimum of 18 years if convicted on all counts. The state charges for the vehicle theft and the pending homicide charge for Marion Vickers could add another 12 to 20. The FBI is confident. The evidence is airtight. What about bail? Denied. Federal judge ruled he's a flight risk and a danger to the community. He's in federal custody. He stays there. Cole looked at Dottie. You won't see him again unless you choose to. Courtroom, victim impact statement. Your choice. Nobody's going to make you. Dottie nodded slowly. What about the others? The crew? Harlan Greer, denied bail. The 9 Tier 3 members, 6 denied, 3 released on GPS monitoring pending trial. But Cole, they're done. The asset forfeiture took everything. The salvage yard, the cash, the Hollow Creek accounts. Miles built a 9-year operation and Fletcher Boggs ended it in 8 hours with a pair of bolt cutters. At 4:33 p.m., Coldwater knocked on the Boggs family door. Fletcher answered, still wearing the oversized green Carhartt jacket, still slight and quiet, in the way that children who've done extraordinary things don't immediately understand are extraordinary. Hey, Fletcher, your dad home? Yeah, come in. Dale appeared from the kitchen. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. Coldwater sat at the table, pulled out his laptop. I wanted to show you both something. The operational ledger we recovered from Conrad Miles's safe, the one that documented 9 years of criminal activity, had entries that we cross-referenced against stolen vehicle reports. He turned the screen, showed them the timeline. Fletcher, you found the tire tracks on Thursday. You reported them to your dad Thursday night, to Deputy Maynard Friday afternoon, to the church auxiliary Saturday morning. Every time, you were told it was nothing. Every time, you went back anyway. He pulled up a map. The tire tracks you found were from the F350 that Harlan Greer was driving Wednesday morning. The location you identified was the access point Miles's crew had been using since 2019 to move vehicles into the hollow area for temporary concealment before transport to the salvage yard. Nobody knew about that access point. Not state police, not the FBI, not the county sheriff. Fletcher was very quiet. You didn't just find Dottie. You found the piece of the network that 9 years of investigation had missed. The access point, the route, the geography. Because you'd been in those woods every weekend for 5 years, and you knew what belonged and what didn't. Dale's voice came out rough. I should have listened. Coldwater looked at him. Mr. Boggs, your son learned to trust his observations from somewhere. He learned to document, to report, to persist when adults dismissed him. That's not accidental. He learned to be thorough. That comes from watching someone be thorough. He closed the laptop. Fletcher, the chapter wants to offer you something. It's not a reward, it's recognition. The bolt cutters you used. We've had them cleaned, engraved. There's a brass plate on the handle now. Says Garrison Hollow, October 2024, F. Boggs. They're yours. But more than that, the chapter is establishing a fund for your education. College, trade school, whatever you choose. It's not a charity. It's an investment. Because what you did Saturday is what we all should have done. And we want to make sure you have every opportunity to keep doing it. Fletcher looked at his father. Dale nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You're the one who went back. Wednesday, 10:15 a.m. Dottie stood in the doorway of a 2-bedroom rental on Maple Street in Beckley. Temporary housing, while their own place underwent security upgrades, the chapter was funding. The key was in her hand. New locks. Different location. Cole beside her. You don't have to stay here if you don't want to. We can go somewhere else. Out of state. Away from... No. Her voice was firm. I'm not running. I'm not letting Conrad Miles take my home, my chapter, my state. I survived 71 hours in a hollow. I'm not leaving West Virginia because a coward with a ledger thought geography was a weapon. Cole studied her face. You sure? I'm sure. They walked inside together. The chapter had furnished it. Practical, simple, nothing fancy. But there were details that mattered. A thermal blanket on the couch, the good kind. Rim shot, a box of ginger tea in the kitchen. Also rim shot. A first aid kit that was actually stocked properly, not the drugstore version, but the real one with trauma supplies. Also rim shot. And on the kitchen table, in an envelope, a check. From the chapter. $8,700 raised in 72 hours from 11 chapters across 3 states. The note said, for whatever you need, no strings, no repayment, your family. Dottie sat at the table, opened her jacket. The birthday card was still there, against her chest where it had been for 10 days. She pulled it out, read it again. Cole's handwriting. Her name. Cole sat across from her. You kept it. I read it approximately 140 times in that hollow. Every hour. Kept me, her voice caught. Kept me here. He reached across the table. She put the card in his hand. He looked at it, rain-damaged, creased, worn from being read and reread, and held against a chest that was choosing to keep breathing. I wrote this on a Sunday morning, left it on your bike seat before you woke up. Figured you'd find it when you left for your ride. I found it Tuesday night. Put it in my jacket pocket Wednesday morning. They didn't find it when they took everything else. I had your words for 71 hours. That's what I had. Cole put the card back in her hand. She put it back in her jacket pocket. It stayed there. Thursday afternoon, 3:42 p.m. Fletcher sat in the school counselor's office, not because he was in trouble, but because the principal thought he might need to talk to someone after the events of the weekend. The counselor, Ms. Patricia Hewitt, 38, had worked in the Raleigh County school system for 12 years. She knew how to talk to children who'd seen things they shouldn't have seen. "Fletcher, how are you feeling about everything that happened?" He thought about that. "I don't know yet." "That's okay. You don't have to know yet. Everyone keeps saying I'm brave. I didn't feel brave. I just felt like nobody was listening, so I had to do something. That's what brave is. Doing the thing that needs doing when nobody else will." Fletcher looked at his hands. 4 adults told me I was wrong. My dad, the deputy, the church ladies. They all had reasons. Good reasons. They were tired or busy or scared. I get that. But Mrs. Crane was still in the woods. And if I'd listened to them. But you didn't. No, I didn't. Miss Hewitt leaned forward slightly. "Fletcher, what you did is going to change how this community listens to children. The school district is implementing a new protocol. Any student reporting potential danger gets a mandatory follow-up within 24 hours. No dismissals, no assumptions. That's because of you. I just wanted someone to check. I know. And now because you didn't stop trying, the next time a kid reports something, adults will check. That's what you changed." At 6:30 p.m. Thursday, Pitchfork knocked on the Boggs family door. He was 69 years old, chapter co-founder, elder statesman. He'd ridden with Cole's father. He'd been at the Veterans Memorial Saturday night. He'd stood at the front of 1,247 bikes and watched a thin boy in a green jacket walk into the parking area and understand, for the first time, what he'd actually done. Fletcher answered the door. Pitchfork didn't say anything for 3 seconds, just looked at the boy. Then, "Your bolt cutters ready?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Need you to come to the clubhouse Saturday. Got something to show you." Saturday, 2 p.m. Hell's Angels, West Virginia Chapter Clubhouse. Fletcher walked in with his father. The bolt cutters were over his shoulder, cleaned, engraved, the brass plate catching the light. The main room was full. Not 1,247 full, but 60, maybe 70 brothers. Enough to matter. Stetson stood at the front, gestured for Fletcher to come forward. Fletcher walked slowly. Dale stayed back. "Fletcher Boggs, you're 11 years old. You don't have a patch. You don't have a bike. You're not a brother." Fletcher nodded. "But what you are is the reason Doy Crane is alive. What you are is the reason a 9-year criminal network is facing federal RICO charges. What you are is the reason this community is changing how it listens to children." Stetson held up a framed certificate. "The chapter has voted, unanimously, to name you an honorary brother. You'll never wear the patch. That's not how this works. But your name goes in our book, your family, for life. And if you ever need anything, you call. Someone answers. Always." He handed Fletcher the certificate, then stepped aside. The 60 brothers in that room stood, slow, deliberate. A standing acknowledgement that lasted 15 seconds. Fletcher held the certificate, looked at the bolt cutters, looked at the men standing. "I just went back. That's all I did." Pitchfork's voice came from the side. Quiet. Certain. "That's everything, son. That's everything." 6 months later. Cole Crane stood outside Crab Orchard Elementary at 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday in April, waiting for the bell. He wasn't there for Fletcher. Fletcher took the bus home. He was there because Ms. Patricia Hewitt had called him that morning and asked if he could come by. She met him at the front entrance. "Mr. Crane, thank you for coming. I wanted to show you something." She led him to a bulletin board in the main hallway. It was covered in photos, news clippings, and student artwork. At the center, a photograph of Fletcher from the Beckley Register Herald article. The headline, "Boy's Persistence Saves Life, Exposes Criminal Network." Around it, 43 student essays, handwritten, titled, "What I Would Do If Nobody Listened." After Fletcher's story became public, we did a unit on advocacy and persistence, asked students to write about a time they saw something wrong, or knew something was true but weren't believed, or to imagine what they would do if they were in Fletcher's position. Cole read 3 of them. One from a 9-year-old girl who'd reported bullying 5 times before anyone took action. One from a 12-year-old boy who'd seen a neighbor hitting a dog and didn't know who to tell. One from a 10-year-old who'd found a younger student locked in a bathroom and got a teacher who initially dismissed it as kids playing. Fletcher's story gave them permission to believe their observations mattered, and it gave us, the adults, a reminder that children see things we miss. Not because they're more perceptive, because they're paying attention differently. Cole looked at the board. At 43 voices saying, "I see something, I know something, I won't be quiet." "Ms. Hewitt, does Fletcher know about this?" "No, I wanted you to see it first." "Can I take a photo?" "Of course." Cole took 3 photos, sent them to Dottie. Her response came back in 11 seconds. That boy changed everything. 18 months after the Hollow, Doy Crane walked into Beckley ARH Emergency Department at 7 a.m. for her shift, 2 days a week, same as before, because Conrad Miles didn't get to take this from her either. She'd been back to work for 14 months. The wrist scars had faded to thin white lines that only showed in certain light. The hypothermia was ancient history. The Hollow was something she thought about less and less. Except when she thought about it every day. At 9:23 a.m., a call came in. MVA, single vehicle, Route 3, near the Garrison Hollow turnoff. Female driver. Responsive, possible head injury. Dottie's hands stopped for exactly 2 seconds. Route 3, near Garrison Hollow. She was on the ambulance when it left the bay. The driver was a woman, 36, conscious but disoriented. Airbag deployment. Minor lacerations. She'd swerved to avoid debris, overcorrected, hit the guardrail. While rimshot stabilized her C-spine and checked her pupils, the woman kept saying, I'm fine, I just need to get to work." Dottie crouched beside the gurney. "Ma'am, you've been in an accident. You're going to the hospital. We need to make sure you're okay before you go anywhere." "I don't have time for this. My boss, he's going to—" "Your boss can wait. Your brain can't." The woman's eyes focused slightly. You're the one. From the news, the biker wife." Dottie was quiet. "Yeah, I'm the one. You were in the woods for 3 days. 71 hours. The woman's voice dropped. How do you just— You don't just. You take it 1 hour. You manage what you can control. You stay alive, specifically to be findable. And when someone finds you, you let them help." The woman started crying. Not from the accident. From something else. "I've been trying to leave him for 8 months, my husband. He says if I do, he'll make sure nobody finds me." Dottie looked at Rimshot. He nodded once. This just became more than an MVA. "What's your name?" "Laura. Laura Dennison." "Laura, when we get to the hospital, I'm going to introduce you to someone. Her name is Agent Carla Reeves. She works with people who need to leave situations that aren't safe. And I'm going to give you a phone number. It's for a chapter of people who show up when someone needs help. You're not alone. You understand? You're not alone." Laura nodded. kept crying. At the hospital, Dottie made 2 calls. First to Agent Reeves. "I have someone who needs you." Second to Cole. "I just found the next one." 3 years and 2 months after the Hollow, Fletcher Boggs, now 14, stood in the back of the Garrison Hollow Baptist Church during the Wednesday evening service. He didn't come often. His father wasn't religious, and Fletcher wasn't sure he was either. But tonight was different. Because Margaret Hollins, the auxiliary president who'd told him he had quite an imagination, was stepping down, and she'd asked if Fletcher would come for her final address. She stood at the front, older, grayer, carrying something heavy. 3 years ago, an 11-year-old boy came to me outside this church and asked for help. He told me he thought someone was chained in the woods, that he'd been hearing sounds, finding evidence, trying to get adults to listen. And I looked at him and told him he had quite an imagination. I sent him home. Her voice shook. Doy Crane spent 32 more minutes in that hollow because I was afraid. Because it was easier to dismiss a child than to walk into woods I didn't understand. Because I chose my comfort over his credibility. She looked directly at Fletcher. I've spent 3 years with that choice. And here's what I've learned. The work of faith isn't sitting in a building on Sunday morning telling ourselves we're good people. The work of faith is listening when someone asks for help. Especially when that someone is a child. Especially when what they're saying makes us uncomfortable. She held up a document. The church auxiliary has established a new protocol. Any report from anyone under 18 about potential danger gets immediate escalation to pastoral staff and local authorities. No dismissals, no assumptions. We call it the Fletcher Protocol. She looked at him again. I can't undo what I said to you that Saturday. I can't give Dottie back those 32 minutes. But I can make sure the next time a child comes to me with something that sounds impossible, I believe them first, and ask questions second. After the service, she walked up to Fletcher. I don't expect you to forgive me. Fletcher was quiet. Then, I'm not mad at you. You should be. Maybe. But I was mad for a long time, and it didn't change anything. You're changing things now. That matters more. Margaret's eyes filled. You're a better person than I am? I don't know about that. I just know I'm not carrying what you're carrying. That looks heavy. It is. Fletcher handed her something. A folded piece of paper. She opened it. It was one of the student essays from the Crab Orchard Elementary bulletin board. The one from the 12-year-old who'd seen a neighbor hitting a dog and didn't know who to tell. That kid told Ms. Hewitt about the dog because I told my story. And Ms. Hewitt called animal control. And the dog got out. That happened because I didn't stop trying. But also because you started teaching people to listen. You're part of that. Margaret read the essay. Read it again. Thank you. You're welcome. 7 years after the Hollow. Cole Crane sat in his garage at midnight on a Thursday, the motorcycle he'd been rebuilding for 11 months finally complete. It was a 1986 Harley Ironhead. Dottie's first bike, the one she'd sold when they bought the Road King, the one he'd tracked down 6 months ago through a private seller in North Carolina, and bought back without telling her. He'd restored it completely. Original paint. Original chrome. Everything exactly as it was the first time she'd ridden it 23 years ago. Tomorrow was their 26th anniversary. This was the gift. But tonight, he was sitting in the garage at midnight, staring at the bike, thinking about the Hollow. About how close. About 8 hours and 41 minutes. About a boy who'd heard a chain on a Thursday and gone back 4 times when every adult said no. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to Fletcher's number, the one Fletcher had given him 3 years ago when he'd turned 14 and gotten his first phone. Cole had never called it, but he'd kept it. He typed a message. "You awake?" 30 seconds later. "Yeah. Everything okay?" "Yeah. Just wanted to say thank you for not giving up, for not listening when we told you to stop, for trusting what you knew." 3 minutes passed. Then, "Mr. Crane, I think about that hollow sometimes, about what would have happened if I'd listened. I didn't save Mrs. Crane because I was brave. I saved her because I was stubborn, and because nobody took my bolt cutters away." Cole stared at the message, then typed, "Stubbornness is underrated. So are bolt cutters. You ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call. That offer doesn't expire." "I know. Thank you." Cole put the phone down, looked at the iron head. Tomorrow, Dottie would see this bike. She'd cry. He knew she'd cry, because she'd cried exactly once in 7 years, and it was the moment he'd shown up at the hospital. She'd ride it. She'd take the same roads she'd taken 23 years ago. And every mile would be a mile Conrad Miles didn't get to take from her. Cole stood, walked to the wall. There, mounted in a frame, were the bolt cutters. Fletcher had loaned them to Cole 2 years ago for a chapter exhibit about ordinary tools doing extraordinary things. Cole had mounted them, photographed them, returned them, but he'd kept one photograph. Orange handles. Brass plate. "Garrison Hollow, October 2024. F. Boggs." The tool that ended a 9-year criminal empire. The tool that saved his wife's life. The tool an 11-year-old carried 847 feet through West Virginia woods because 4 adults told him he was wrong and he decided they weren't. Cole turned off the garage light, walked inside. Dottie was asleep. He stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe. 8 hours and 41 minutes. She'd been that close. And a boy with bolt cutters had been exactly close enough.
This story isn't about bikers. It's not about patches or motorcycles or the specific geography of a West Virginia hollow. It's about a boy who heard something and refused to be quiet, who documented what he saw, who reported it to 4 different adults and was dismissed 4 different times, with 4 different reasons, all of them reasonable, all of them insufficient, all of them wrong. It's about Doy Crane, who managed her own survival for 71 hours with the discipline of a woman who'd read a wilderness manual once and retained the chapter on exposure, who stayed alive specifically to be findable, who asked a practical question when rescue arrived because wasting the moment on emotion was not an option she had room for. It's about 1,247 people who showed up because one person decided that knowing something was enough to act on. But here's what it's really about. Every adult in this story had a reason not to go into those woods. They were tired, or skeptical, or afraid, or busy, or certain that an 11-year-old's imagination was more likely than a woman chained to a tree. Fletcher Boggs had the same reasons. He went anyway. Not because he was brave in the way we tell children bravery looks, because he knew what he'd heard, and he decided that knowing was enough to act on. Doy Crane survived 71 hours in a West Virginia hollow through discipline, preparation, and the specific stubbornness of a woman who had decided that dying was not an option she was prepared to exercise. She was rescued by a boy with bolt cutters who had been told 4 times that he was wrong. They were both right. That is the whole story. If you've ever seen something and been told you were imagining it, you weren't. If you've ever reported something and been dismissed, that didn't make you wrong. If you've ever been the small voice in a room full of adults who had reasons not to listen, your voice mattered anyway. You don't need a motorcycle to show up. You don't need a patch. You don't need to be big or loud or powerful. You need to trust what you know. Document what you see. Report what doesn't belong. And then go back. Because the next Fletcher Boggs is reading this right now. The next Doy Crane is waiting for someone to hear the sound that doesn't belong. The next Conrad Miles is counting on everyone being too tired, too skeptical, too afraid, too busy to pay attention. Don't be too tired. Don't be too skeptical. Don't be too afraid. Don't be too busy. Pay attention. Ask uncomfortable questions. Walk into the woods even when it scares you. Because 8 hours and 41 minutes is not a lot of margin. And bolt cutters only work if someone carries them. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the times you dismissed a child, or the times you were dismissed, or the person in your life right now who keeps trying to tell you something, subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And comment below. Who was your Fletcher? Who believed you when nobody else would? Or, who did you fail to believe? And what would you do differently now? I'll ask you one question at the end. You already know your answer. Are you listening?